Hello, everybody. Welcome to UFO Man Live. My name is Tim, and tonight we have a very special guest with us. His name is Mike CLELLAND. Um, he is responsible for intense research into the connection between owls and UFO abductees, UFO abductions, the synchronicities of the paranormal and psychic abilities. So please welcome Mike CLELLAND to our show.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Tonight we also have Polly Rotterman returning all the way from Israel. So please welcome her to the panel. It is 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning there. So we are very honored to have her tonight. The other two panelists that are going to be here are having difficulties technically. So when they sort them out, they will be coming back on the panel. So till then, without further ado, Mike, I got a question for you, and then I'll bring you up full screen.
Great.
The question I got for you is a simple one. Why owls?
Why owls? In my book, I asked that question, I don't know how many times. I have to ask myself that question. So I could very easily, I feel like I've studied this enough that I could kind of wing it and give a pretty good answer. And I could actually probably sound pretty smart giving an answer, but I would be making it up. I would be speculating. I would only be speculating. So there are four. So people have asked me this before, and I always say, oh, I don't know, owls are. How do I know why owls? But I have come up with four separate, and that's part of the reason I'm going to grab this little book here because I'm going to. Can I read something right from a book? It's a little cheating,
Sure,
right?
Sure you can.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So this is I very formally. I worked hard on this. So again, I don't know why owls, but here's to make a good guess, I got to give four good guesses. So number one, owls are alarm clocks. The simplest answer would be they are here to wake us up. So, but then you have to ask the next question: wake us up to what? Okay. Number two, and this one really feels like it fits. And it's a little bit ethereal, but number two is owls are an archetype. They are a symbol, an image stored deep within humanity's genetic memory bank. It's as if there are hidden meanings locked away within our grand shared consciousness, and the owl is the key. We think in symbols, and the owl is touching us on that level. And this deeper level goes back to the dawn of man. But again, the follow-up question would be, what is that hidden archetypal meaning? And then the third one is, owls are here to announce initiation. And by saying that, I have a little long wordy thing to go there, but an initiation implies a ritual of some sort. And so within the lore, I feel like if you look at when the owls show up in people's lives and when they show up in the context of a UFO event, it seems to show up ahead of the event often, and it feels like it's an initiatory process. It's like a ritual symbol that shows up at the point of initiation. These answers I've given you have been boiled down after a lot of research. So, and then the fourth one is owls are a totem of the transformational experience. Seeing a UFO can transform someone. I have spoken to a lot of people who have seen strange craft in the sky, and in that moment, their entire definition of reality is altered. I've also spoken with people who have seen owls at such highly charged moments that it transformed their lives. But a transformation into what? So one of the questions I ask when people have an owl experience or a UFO experience or a co-joined owl and UFO experience, I will ask, what was going on in your life in the lead up to the event and what changed after? And very often they'll have a very dramatic, oh my gosh, my whole life changed. I quit my job, I moved to the other side of the country, or I had a spiritual awakening and I went back to college to study philosophy or physics. So those are the things that I'm finding. Now, let me just also say this. I'm looking at, so there's the UFO continuum. It's got all this information, right? It's got like UFO conspiracies in the government. It's got people doing psychic channeling in Sedona, Arizona, but within the middle of somewhere, there's this little thin sliver of owls that show up in people's stories. It's not it's like a little component to this great big huge mystery, this thin little slice. And I'm not focused on the big picture. I'm focused on this little narrow slice, and I'm pulling on this tiny little thread. And what has happened, when I started doing this, I figured I'd write like a magazine length article and be done with it and move on and not worry about owls anymore. That has not happened. The consistency and the power of these owl stories has left me in awe, and it has been continually, I want to use the word seductive. It's been continually seductive. It has drawn me in a way where I find that I am still, after like 15 years of what feels like rather obsessive compulsive research, it I am still continually amazed at the power that these stories have. So there's a long answer to your question of why owls.
Well, I do want to ask you this. Can you relate to us the first time that you had a personal experience with owls?
Well, I was doing a lot of outdoor work for a while. I taught in the outdoors, so I was seeing a lot of owls, and there was chapters in my life when I would actually see quite a number of owls, and but those are just owls, and they're a very very majestic bird. They have a bold presence. So anyone who sees an owl, like there's owls out there. It's not paranormal if you see an owl on a branch when you're walking in the forest at twilight. They're out there. But what is consistent is people will say, "Oh, I saw this owl, and it took my breath away." Or they'll say, this is what I actually hear a lot. An owl landed, people tell a totally mundane story. An owl landed in my backyard, and they'll say, I felt blessed. I felt honored to see this bird. People don't say that about robins or, hawks or, I mean, it has a different majestic power, and everyone knows that intuitively. And so, here I did the thing I do. I'm so good at this. What was your question? You were asking, you meant,
I was asking when,
when did I have my first experience? So
yes.
I went camping in 2006 with a woman named Kristen. This would have been in Idaho, right on the Wyoming border. And we went into the Tetons, which is a mountain range, which is just south of Yellowstone National Park. And it's right on the Wyoming border, Wyoming-Idaho border. So, and it's a beautiful mountain range. So we went into the mountains for one night. Now, this was a stranger. I met her in town, and I had been working in Alaska, so I had been out in the mountains all summer long. This was in 2006. It would have been September or October of 2006, the end of September, beginning of October. I don't have the right date. And she and I were talking as the sun was setting. It was a beautiful night. We didn't bring a tent. We knew the weather was going to be fine. We are just going out for one night. We're going to camp for one night. This was a stranger. Like, this is kind of bold on my part to ask a stranger out to go camping for one night. But so, and we're still good friends. I just talked to her the other day. Now, almost 19 years later, might be 20 years later now. Oh no, it's 18 or 19 years ago. So she was talking, and as the sun was setting and as the night was approaching, this is a small detail in the story, but I cannot ignore it. She was giving her most heartfelt definition of what God meant to her. And at that point, an owl flew over us, and then a second owl, and then a third owl. And for the next couple of hours, we watched these owls fly around. And now let me back up a little bit. When she was talking about God, now, like, I'm not at all churchy, and I didn't even think about it that in the moment, but afterwards I was like, that's really a powerful moment. Not so much of like the religious aspect of God, but I will almost say I'll say it, the archetypal aspect of God. Like, it is a powerful symbolic idea in our culture. And that showed up at the time this owl showed up. They flew around us for a couple hours. When we laid down, we didn't have a tent. We just laid out under the stars, like cowboy camping, and it's a beautiful calm night. But this is the Northern Rockies, so there's a million, billion, trillion stars, and and these owls would fly right over, right in front of our faces, and they would blot out the sky for just half a second. It was totally quiet. It was so powerful. Afterwards, we walked the next morning. We're like, wow, pretty cool about the owls. Yeah, it was great. And then we kind of said, let's go camping again. That was fun. We'll do it one more time. So 4 days later, we went out camping again, and the exact same thing happened. At sunset, 3 owls flew around us. We were camped in a completely different spot, in a completely different area, and I did not say this at the time, but I'm saying it now. When we were seeing those owls, the second time when Kristen and I saw those owls, the first time they were they'd stay off, they'd land on a branch way over there, or they'd swoop above us. This time they were like landing on the branch right next to us, or they were landing at our feet. And it was remarkable, just remarkable. And in the moment, I had this very clear thought. Now, this is getting close to 20 years ago. I have some diary entry stuff, and I look back at the diary entry and I'm like, did I really say that? I guess that's what I wrote at the moment, and I have a tough time trusting it. But what I felt was that I was seeing these owls. A voice in my head said, this has something to do with the UFOs. Now, leading up to that, I was, at the time I would have been 44 years old. And leading up to that, I was dealing with some memories and some things that had happened in my youth, and things that certainly implied what we would now call UFO abduction. And I knew it. I knew what it implied, but I wasn't going there. I was like, no way, not me, no way. And then after it wasn't, there was no UFO in this event, except for the voice in my head that said, this has something to do with UFOs. So after that, I began studying my own experiences and reaching out to UFO researchers and asking about my own experiences. And so I was simultaneously researching owls, the totem meaning of owls, the mythic meaning of owls, as well as my own UFO contact experiences. And what I would do is, when I met people who were working in the field, whether they were experiencers or whether they were researchers, I would say, hey, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And right away, people were saying, oh, that's interesting. No one's ever asked me this question. I have the weirdest story about an owl. And they would start telling me these stories. And little by little, I began kind of writing them down and archiving them and keeping files. And then I started a blog, and I very quickly started writing about owls. And I told the story I just told here with Kristen. It's on one of the first blog posts on my blog back in 2009. And so consequently, if anyone, and I was writing about the connection between UFOs and owls, and I was baffled by it. So I was asking because I was fascinated and I didn't understand it. And starting way back then, 2009, 15 years ago, I started getting emails and correspondence from people sharing their owl stories. So very quickly, if you Googled UFO owls, I would be the first thing that comes up, and then I'm about the next 25 things below that. So if anyone anywhere in the world has a UFO and owl experience that's co-joined, they're going to find me in about 2 mouse clicks. So that was my first experience, and that's what led me into doing the research and eventually led to books and such.
Okay, Polly.
So I was wondering, what is the relation between owls, Native American cultures, and ETs? And like after death experiences. Because some take owls as messengers, some take them maybe as ETs, and maybe our Native Americans took it like totally different. So what do you say about it?
So as far as the Native American folklore and their belief system, that's a tough one, right? Because the tribe in upstate New York is going to have something totally different than a tribe in southern Arizona as far as their lineage and their knowledge of owls. What is consistent is that they are seen as messengers, and often not good messengers. They deliver a tough message. They're not like a light and
Yes.
fluffy totem. Hummingbirds are in the Native American lore can deliver a light message of a sweet, gentle, buoyant, happy message. The owls are known to do
That's
that. But
nice that you mention it because that would be my grandmother if we
how
already
funny!
mentioned my father. Yes. I'm so amazed right
So so
now.
but so the lore, and this is not just this is around the world. The hummingbird has a very light, magical, playful sort of dragonflies, and for they're similar kind of. They have a magical kind of vibe to them. Now owls in the most definitely in the southwest desert cultures of North America, in northern Mexico, in southern America, in southern part of the United States, the lore is very dark with owls. People don't want a Navajo native told me, and I've tried to look it up and I can't find it, but he said that the word owl in his language is the same as the word sinister. They're the same word in his language. And and they have a very dark, sinister vibe. Bad luck. That's also in Ireland. That's in England. The bad luck aspect. In Africa, there's lots of bad
Do
luck.
you know about South American Indians?
A lot of death, owls and death. This is going back to like almost like the Aztecs. That the owl would be the gatekeeper of the realm of the dead. So where that
Mm.
might be a giant black dog in Celtic lore, yeah. And so, but let's as a big picture, the myth of the owl. If there's one consistency, because there's one folklore here in is going to be different than a folklore here. I'm looking for the consistencies. The owl can fly in the forest in complete darkness, which must have seemed like magic to ancient man, right? So we live in an era of the electric light bulb. Right? My grandfather was born in like 1885, so that was before the electric light bulb, and so that's only a couple generations removed from me, and the nighttime, the night must have had a completely different experience just a few generations ago. It's totally new that we can feel comfortable in the night with flashlights and lights and cars, and there's all kinds of reasons that the night has lost its mystique. So the owl
Yeah.
was symbolic of the night, and it could fly in the forest in complete darkness, fly through the trees, and that became a metaphor in a lot of folklore for flying to the land of the dead, flying to the land of our ancestors, flying to that other realm. And you take that one step further, and the owl would then come back with a message. So they were the messengers from that other realm, from the realm of the night. Where an eagle flies in the bright day, that eagle would be considered a messenger from the daylight. And that would be a totally different set of myths, right? The night is the shadow, the night is our our subconscious, the daylight is our conscious aspect. So that's things about, that's Zeus from the Greek gods had a companion eagle, or he was associated with an eagle, and eagles fly in the bright day, and Zeus had all kinds of problems with greed and envy and pride, and so he had all these sort of outward conscious issues, where the owl at night represents your dreamscape. So it has a much more mysterious, ethereal aspect to it.
Yes.
So that's our ancient lore of the owls. If you if you okay, so Harry Potter, the most popular
I
set of books.
know.
Harry Potter, the most popular set of books, are modern mythology, right? We could say that that is a is a case of our modern mythology. Everyone's, even if they haven't read the books, they know about Harry Potter and the magic and all that. But Harry Potter had an owl that delivered the mail. It is a messenger. This is not ancient
Messages. I
history.
know.
It's right now. It's our living mythology right now. So you asked one question, I went on and on and on. So
Did you talk
Yes.
to her about this?
I would love to talk to J.K. Rowling. She has owl right in her name too, but that doesn't mean anything though. But that's the kind of thing I would know. So she has OWL right in Rowling. So
If
I would
you
love to
do,
talk to
please
her.
let us know.
Because there's two things, right? She could have known about the mythology of the owl and sort of very consciously put it into the story, right? Owl as messenger. She could have done that on purpose, or, which I think is even better, this floats my boat even more. If she did it unconsciously, she just kind of was typing away and said, "Oh, let's have something. They got to deliver the mails. They can have owls. They've got a mystique, sure." And if she did it unconsciously, that would be so much better in my mind. And I don't know how I would ask her. Do you know what I'm saying?
So please talk to her and let us know.
I'm waiting for her to return my emails. She hasn't yet, so.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to her too. In regards to the owl, let's take one step back, and I would like to know what you think the connection is directly, the direct connection between seeing an owl or hearing an owl and alien abduction.
The connection. So I have this book is 400 pages long. This is a big fat book, and it is
Right.
filled with, I don't know how many stories, hundreds of stories, and I've collected thousands of stories that people have come to me and I've asked, and I'm asking for these stories. I want to hear your owl stories. I'm getting them, so it's not a mystery to why they're arriving in my email inbox. But I try to correspond with the people. It's not 100% of the cases, but when people have, let's say, it's starting to rain here a little bit. I don't know if you can hear it outside. It sounds great. When people are having a UFO contact event, let's say something that plays out like abduction, owls will often show up. I'll tell two stories here. One story involved this guy, Derek, who contacted me very early on in my research. And I got to sit with Derek, and talk with him about his experience. He was camping in the desert, and it was the first time in the desert for him, and he was with a friend, and he was blown away by the big open space and the stars, and he was from the East Coast, and he looks up and there was an owl on top of a cactus looking down at him. And they could point the flashlight at this owl, and him and his friend were like, "Wow, that's kind of creepy." And the owl flies off, and moments later, a triangle-shaped craft kind of goes right over them and then continues down the landscape. And when I talked with him, he was fighting to try to describe the strangeness of how this thing flew. And I kind of did the thing, what could have been a helicopter? He's like, no way. A jet plane could have been a jet. No, totally silent. Wasn't a jet plane, wasn't a helicopter, and it moved like nothing I'd ever seen before. Now, so that in the following, whatever, 12, 15 years, I've heard that story in one form or another. At times I'm getting about 6 owl and UFO stories a day. And do the math, multiply that by about a decade. And I'm getting a couple stories like that every day.
Wow.
For a decade. It's like, it's essentially the story of the same mood. Okay, so it's just an owl seems to show up in conjunction with a UFO event. I mean, a UFO event is very rare, and seeing an owl is rare, but it's not as rare as seeing a UFO. But to have those two co-joined with such consistency just doesn't match up with what would be randomness. Now, here's the other aspect. This is where it gets a little more murky. Very common for people to describe, there's a term called screen memory in the lore of the UFO contact experience. And people will describe driving down a lonely road at night, and they'll turn a corner. This is another one. I get this one all the time. And after you've heard it like 500 times, you kind of get the point. they turn a corner and there's a big owl standing in the road, bigger than it should be. And they stop the car, and sometimes they can like pull right up to it. It doesn't move. And they kind of, they drive around it, or there's some little event there, and then they come home, and they should have been home at midnight, and it's 2 in the morning. So somehow they lost 2 hours of time. And if it's not an owl, it's a deer. So this would be the screen memory aspect of this. And so let's stick with the owl thing for just a moment. So if that person was to go under hypnosis, and I've talked to a lot of hypnotherapists who do this kind of research, and I ask, like, well, how does it go? What do you ask about the owls? Because they'll say that was the impetus. The people come to me because they have a weird owl story and they want an answer. And then they'll go under hypnosis, and the hypnotherapist will say, describe the owl. And then they're under the hypnotic trance, and they'll say, well, it's bald, and it's got big black eyes, and it's got this skinny body, and it's wearing a little spacesuit, and I don't think that's an owl. So they're describing what we would call the prototypical gray being, the gray alien. And let me add again, so it's not just owls, it would be owls and deer are at the top of the list. Like they're right at the top. Like I would say over half of these kind of memories are at the top. And then below that is like squirrels and raccoons and firemen and clowns, and Jesus shows up as a screen memory at times. And so there's these other things that show up as screen memories. And the implication is that these gray beings are using the psychic image of an owl for some purpose. It might be an owl is something you might see at night. A deer is something you might see at night. A raccoon is something you might see at night. But people are saying, like, oh, I woke up at the foot of my bed was a 4-foot tall owl, and then I, blacked out. And these stories are just filling the UFO abduction research files. But I feel strongly that Derek saw a real owl. I feel strongly that the owls I saw with Kristen were real owls. There was no UFO in that event except for the voice in my head. So, and it was that voice that led me on this big journey here. So,
right. I was going to say, who Deborah Cobble is, right?
Yeah, I'm good friends with her. Yes.
From Intruders. Well, she said that she had a screen memory of a barking dog when she was a kid, and it made her afraid. Like it made her and her sister keep from talking about what happened to them. So as you were saying, the screen memories always have a purpose. And I think that they're being used by several different species. I don't know who's visiting here other than the Greys, but yeah, they're being used. I actually saw a giant spider.
Wow.
It was at least, I'd say, 3.5 foot tall, 4 feet wide, black spider. And I saw it shortly after I had seen multiple orbs of bright yellow light floating around my bedroom. This is when I was a kid. So I think I saw screen memory because it kept me from talking about it. I brought it up to my mother, and she scolded me for being imaginative. And I never brought it up again until probably the last 2 years.
Very interesting. So this is that aspect that sort of we are presented oftentimes. There's like it's tough to give a good universal answer to some of these things because every story is slightly different. But there is like dream language kind of embedded into the story. There's archetypal symbolism embedded into these stories. And then there's sort of mythic symbolism embedded into these stories. So the giant spider that's straight out of like your nightmare, right? I mean, that's dream language to me. And that's what's showing up in these things. And this is what makes me cautious to again, people are saying, "Oh, we need disclosure," and then they have these, jet pilots that flew for the Navy, and they were on an aircraft carrier, and they have this sighting, and they're on all the headlines and stuff like that. But there's something much weirder going on, and much more that feels like it's tapping into some primal element to us as humans. Giant spiders, owls, deer, owls, spiders. These are filled with ancient folklore. I mean, that the
Right.
spider shows up in uh, uh, Greek mythology. Grandmother spider is a term that is used by the Native Americans to talk about the weaving that they're making.
It's also in nursery rhymes.
Yeah, oh yeah.
What a,
So
we got a question for you from the chat room from Wally's World 420. So is it bad if we have an owl in our trees?
nope, not in my opinion. If you let's say if you were living in the Navajo reservation or the Hopi reservation in Utah, you might have a different folklore to it, but that would be the folklore that would have a mystique about it. I think owls are totally beautiful animals. I think they have a ton of majesty. They keep the mouse population down. So they're a beautiful, powerful predator. And now here's the thing. So if you got an why is this guy like tapping into a UFO podcast then if he's got an owl in his tree? So does he have a story? Does Wally have a story that brought him here? Because this is very common for people that I mean there's owls in trees a lot, but
Wally does have a story, but he has yet to reveal it based on his fear.
I like to, so at this point I've loosened up. Like I got to be real careful because I'm trying to see a big picture thing. You could cherry pick the data. I could pick 5 or 10 really scary owl stories with UFOs. And then I would say they're all scary, but that's not the case. That's not how it plays out when you look at what I'm seeing more is, here, let me back up. There are 5 things that are showing up in my research. One of them is owls and UFOs. Lots of stories about owls and UFOs. We're gonna run out of time long before I could finish telling all the owl and UFO stories I have in my files and in the files between my ears here too. But that's not what I'm getting a lot of stuff where owl stories. Another one is owls and meditation. People meditating will see an owl often at highly charged moments, and it'll be very, very tied into their intention when they were meditating. They'll close their eyes, meditate. They'll be in their living room. They'll open their eyes. There'll be an owl sitting in the window, staring in at them. So owls and meditation, owls and psychedelics, most particularly mushrooms. There are other stories out there, but I'll tell you, the mushroom stories far outnumber the LSD stories and the ayahuasca stories. And so owls and psychedelics, most particularly mushrooms, will take mushrooms ritually. Sometimes they do it just to party down, but most often in a ritual setting, and they will either have a real owl show up or they will have a visionary experience with an owl, kind of a psychedelic hallucination of an owl. Those are just as important to me. I don't try to separate those. And then it would be owls and shamanic initiation. This is I feel like I could write a book on this one. Owls showing up at the time that a shaman goes through his initiatory rites. Very well understood within the community of shamans. And then the 5th one would be owls and death. And this is something that another thing I feel like I wrote a big chapter about it in my first book, and it shows up consistently. Owls show up. So there's owls and death in folklore, right? In Shakespeare, in Julius Caesar, and in Macbeth, right before one of the characters dies, there's a hooting of an owl, and it's usually someone in the set, goes hoo 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 in the corner, and that's that like what. I can't remember this. What death does the night bird speak? And then the character dies. So that's an owl foreshadowing someone's death. I have some stories of those. They are rare in my files. What I do have, which is far outnumbers the owl foreshadowing death, is the owl showing up after a loved one dies, most often a parent. And so the child, often an adult child, but the child of the parent will be going through the grieving process. And I have this personally when my mom died, and the story showed up. Didn't happen to us, but someone told me and my brother and sister this story at such a highly charged moment that it felt like God orchestrated this moment for this person to tell us this story. So, and I'll tell her story. She was walking along a path every night after her father had died, and she was trying to deal with the grieving process of her father. And there came a day when every day she would walk on this nature path that went around the neighborhood, and then she would pass an owl on a branch. And finally, she was walking past the owl, and the owl hooted, and she stopped and looked at this owl, and she said, she's from the South, she's very Southern, very proper. She said, "Are you my daddy?" And when she said that, all of her grieving left. She released the grief. Her grieving process ended, and the owl flew off. She wrote me a letter and told me this afterwards. She told me this story with my brother and sister there. My brother and sister were kind of freaked out, and I was like, "You got to tell me this story." So she wrote it to me out in a letter, and she said, with no prompting for me, long before the book was written, she said, "I felt so honored that God would send such a beautiful messenger to tell me that my father was at peace and in a more beautiful
That's
place."
amazing. That's so beautiful.
That is so consistent. It is so consistent in the reports I'm getting. In I have that story in one form or another so often. Let me tell one more. This is one I really love. There was a civic leader in a town, and a reporter was covering the wake. They had a memorial service. Excuse me. They had a memorial service for the civic leader in the town. He's a powerful, strong community leader in the town, and he died. And they had a memorial in the town square. So she contacted me, said, I was at this memorial, and I wrote an article for the newspaper about it. I couldn't tell this. I couldn't put this in the article, but I'm telling you, meaning me. And she said, a white owl, a barn owl, landed on a lamppost. And then everyone in the town, everyone at the thing, they lined up. They just lined up. They got in a line and they just waited in line. The first person in line would stand at the base of the lamppost and say, "Bob, like, thank you so much for being a part of our lives. You were such a great guy. I'm going to miss you terribly. It was an honor to know you." And he would step aside, and the next person would come up and say, "Bob, I loved you so much. You were just such a wonderful guy, and I loved the chance that I had." And this happened. No one had to tell anyone this. This happened completely organically. I am convinced this is consistent all over the world because of the stories I'm receiving. And nobody needs to be told. You don't need to learn this. It's like in our bones somehow. This, and it happens all the time. I'm getting the stories, and for me, there's no UFOs in this story, but it is everything about the power and the symbolic power of the owl.
Another creature that is connected to visitation after a loved one dies is a butterfly.
Yes, yes. A butterfly. So let's just look at the butterfly. A butterfly starts out as a caterpillar.
Right.
Right. So butterfly begins it before you and then there comes a day when the caterpillar makes a cocoon for itself, and the butterfly enters the caterpillar enters the cocoon we had a bunch of butterflies around our house at one point, and they were amazing. But the the caterpillar turns to nothing at all. It like decomposes, turns into like mush. There's nothing in there. There's nothing in there except for like a glob of pudding, and then that turns into a butterfly. So there's a transformation. When I said the owl is the symbolic of the transformational event, no other animal is more symbolic of transformation. It's this ugly worm, goes into a cocoon, turns into nothing at all, and then later emerges as this glorious, delicate, beautiful, gentle butterfly. That flies. This cocoon, this slug, doesn't know it's going to turn into a butterfly someday. That is like I think that is a metaphor. We're all going to go through that transformation at death, and we will, in essence, get our wings and be able
Yes.
to fly.
Very good analogy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Polly.
Well, I heard in one of your interviews, you were talking about meaningful consciousness and synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to maybe tell us what is it?
So I talk to people all the time. I'm talking to people on the phone. I'm corresponding with people all day long, all the time. And these people are having, most often, let's say, UFO and owl experiences. But I would say those other things on the list, those all kind of blend together to me. The death and shamanic initiation and psychedelics and meditation. And so when I talk to these people, so the lore of UFO contact, the mythology in our pop culture is people get taken out of a car at night, they get taken onto a flying saucer, they get put on a table, and these creepy medical exams happen. I've heard that story so rarely. I've been full-time researching this mystery. I've heard that story almost not at all. What I am hearing is people saying, oh my gosh, oh, hummingbirds appeared and dive bombed ahead. Yes, that's, yeah, Renee, yes, that's very common. Okay, so oh, now I just got, my train of thought just got lost. The synchronicity. So people, when I talk to people who have had UFO experiences, they don't talk about the consistency, the overwhelming consistency in their lives is they say, I am at the receiving end of such powerful, improbable coincidences that are so powerful that it leaves me shaken. It's not the little thing where you're like, oh, I was thinking about Joe and Joe calls me on the phone. Like that's like a low level synchronicity. I'm talking about people who like almost mystical, religious type synchronicities of that kind of power. That is what people who have had UFO contact experiences are going through. This is the question I would love to ask those jet pilots in the Navy, right? Those guys who saw the Tic Tac off the Nimitz back in whatever that was, 2002 or something. I want to ask them, like, hey, like, do you have like, was there an uptick in weird, powerful synchronicities in your life? And by synchronicity, I mean a meaningful coincidence, a powerful coincidence that has a meaning to the observer, the person who experiences it. It's not just a pleasant happenstance. It has a emotional impact on their lives. This is what I'm finding, and it's one of the. I use the synchronicity shows up on the book cover of a couple of my books. I take it very seriously. I try to. This is tough, right? So you got UFO sightings, right? That's pretty powerful. You got owl sightings. That's pretty powerful. You got a powerful synchronicity. I try to weight those evenly. I try not to. People tell me these stories. I try to treat each one of them with the same amount of reverence, right? So a UFO researcher would ignore the owls and they would ignore the synchronicities. But I'm saying, no, this is all part of the same soup.
Yeah, we tend to agree with you. Yeah. In regards to owls, I've always had a connection to owls my whole life. I've always seen them. I've always seen them flying. I've always heard them hooting. I don't know what it is, but I've had a connection to them my whole life. What I wanted to ask you is there an uptick in people who have seen an owl either prior to an abduction event or after a near-death experience or after passing of a loved one? Is there an uptick in psychic abilities?
So let me just answer one thing first. The near-death experience, right?
Yes.
Doesn't that feel like it should fit in that list? It's not on the list. It's not it. Like, totally. I'm waiting for someone to say, like, oh, I had a near-death experience and then I saw an owl, or just the other way around. I was like, oh, I was on my way to the hospital and or whatever. I
Yeah.
can't. It's not in there. I don't have it. The near-death experience doesn't seem to have a co-joined owl. What I can say is that people who have a UFO sighting and an owl sighting and a near-death experience, wow, those people are. And I'm going to say this. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this as a fact. I haven't talked to everyone, but for the people who've got those people who have, if you've had a UFO sighting, an owl experience, and a near-death experience, you are off the charts. You have a psychic power. You have psychic abilities that most mere humans will never understand. That is what I'm finding in my research.
What happens if you have an owl encounter and your empathic ability just goes off the charts?
I've talked to people who've. So I got to be careful here because I could probably wing it and say, but I'm trying to think of in my files if I have anyone who has had an owl sighting and then it turned into a. It certainly is part of, let's say, the shamanic process as far as the initiation. So you could almost say that a shaman isn't necessarily a psychic, but they're right in that blurry line where they're using, let's say, mystical traditions to help the members of their tribe, whether that's through psychedelics or through meditation or through rhythmic drumming or something like that. The shaman is trying to help people in their tribe and not helping with medical needs, but more psycho spiritual needs.
Well, what I'm actually referring to is not shamanic instances. I'm talking about regular people with empathic capability. Will an owl sighting possibly cause an uptick in their empathic abilities?
Now, I'm going to be careful. I would say that the owl may show up as a marker at a time when when psychic abilities are increased. Healing abilities too. People who are doing hands-on healing, like Reiki, very consistently
Right.
having. So I would say that this is very tough because I'm struggling with exactly these kinds of questions. So on my keyboard on my computer here is this. It's neutral. There's no special powers in this keyboard, right? It's a piece of technology, but on that keyboard there is one key that has an exclamation mark on it, right? So I can be typing something, and if I want to add emphasis to a sentence, all I do, I guess I have to use the shift key too, so I'm cheating a little bit. So I have to go shift and hit the exclamation point. So then I've used a tool, I've added emphasis to one moment. That's how I see the owl. The owl is showing up. It's a neutral animal, but it is showing up at the precise moment the same way a exclamation point shows up in a sentence. We don't use exclamation points all that often in our writing. Sometimes we do.
Right.
But if we put them there, we're putting them there for a defined reason. I sense that the owl is showing up for a defined reason. I don't think the owl is causing the uptick in psychic ability. I feel the owl is a marker that has been put there. I got to be really careful to say this. I'll do this metaphorically. Metaphorically, the owl is being put there by the gods, by the overwhelming intelligence that is smarter than us, that is adding dream language to our day-to-day lives, and that the owl is showing up symbolically at the time when that person is going through a change where they are becoming psychics. But I don't think it's not the owl that's making them psychic. But yeah.
Yeah, okay. Second Star Survival, my friend Matt says, the day I was being born, my mother told me that an owl landed on the car at the hospital at 10 p.m. and I was born at midnight.
No, what's second stars? Let's just follow up on that. Does this person have psychic abilities?
I don't know.
So I've talked to people who've had it driving to the hospital. I know there's one story I have in my files of an owl that crashed into the car and died on the way to the hospital. I mean, the owl killed it, like smashed into the windshield and died as they were driving to the hospital, and the wife is in labor in the back seat. and this person has some psychic abilities. I got to be careful. This is a story I haven't reviewed in a while, but the implication is that the owl gave its life, gave its life as this new life was about to be born. For what
Wow.
reason, I could speculate on, and I would say that it would tie into these issues, this psychic, this mystical aspect. Yeah.
The empath I was talking about is myself.
I was guessing.
I'm an emotional empath. And when I hear the owls for the last 3 weeks, like I was telling you before the live stream, my sense of awareness of when I walk into a room and sense other people's emotions has been extremely strong. So I'm thinking it has a tie somewhere in there. And from what you're saying, they're letting me know that it's a valid change in my psychic
Mhm.
connection through empathy.
Okay. So,
Otherwise, I wouldn't have really been aware of it.
so you wouldn't have been aware of the owls?
No, I probably wouldn't have been aware of the difference in my empathic capabilities because I have this ability to walk into a room and sense whether the room is friendly or whether the room is very upset. And there's a
got
lot
that
of
too.
aggravation, and I can either back out of it or go into it and approach it. You know, it's a matter of
Yeah.
giving me a heads up.
Very consistent.
Like you
Yes.
feel the energies.
Yes,
Oh yeah.
yes. So I was just wondering if owls had any connection to that.
Well, you just have the story right there. This is what you just shared. This is something I type this so often because people ask me these questions, and they basically what the people contact me and they say, "Am I alone in this?" And they'll tell a story similar to what you've shared, and I will
Right.
type back, "You are not alone in this." Though I have not heard exactly what you're sharing,
Right.
it has. And once again, now I'll say, like, I feel like I'm very empathetic, and I feel like I can really tap into emotions in a way that a lot of people can't.
Right.
And what I can say is that I have not heard exactly that story, but feeling that story. I'm not analyzing it intellectually, but I'm feeling it.
Right.
It has the feel, it has the flavor and mood of the stories that I have learned to trust. So I
Right.
would say just on that level, yeah, that's right in line with the mythology of the owls. So let's go back one more. You've talked about your UFO experiences, you've talked about your owl experiences, and you've talked about this empathy, which could be empathy like fits under the category of psychic awareness or psychic abilities, the ability to feel
Right.
someone else's emotions. I'm
Right.
and I'm really like someone like I talk to someone and they tell me a scary UFO story that's dark and frightening. Wow, I am right there with them. I'm so right there with them. And then later on, I'll talk to someone who has a set of experiences with like UFO contact, and it's completely angelic and blissful and magical and life affirming, and I'm right there with them too. Two different stories. They don't match, but my emotional reaction is to just like bond with the people in a way that tells me something, you know, about their experiences. I mean, I've talked to people who've been through combat and they tell me some frightening stories. I'm empathetic. I can feel, but it's a different thing. Like I don't have the direct experience, so I don't feel drawn into their story in the same way.
Right. Steve Wolf says the last time my mother was taken to rehab after an accident, as I followed, I watched an owl crash into the ambulance windshield.
How's the mother doing now? Yeah, I want to ask these follow-up questions. Like, wow. So I have this is so the owls and death and the owls and there's a lot of owls and ambulance stories. There's one person who their father died, and but he was still alive. The ambulance came to the house, and they climbed into the back of the ambulance at the house with the ambulance crew, and they sat with their father, and they looked out the big back doors of the ambulance, and the doors, just before the doors closed, there was an owl on a branch looking in at them in the ambulance, and that person died. Their father died on that trip to the hospital. So that's one of the accounts where an owl shows up before death. I have those in my files. I have a small amount of those stories. I have a big amount of owls showing up after death. So these like, it's pretty rare to hit an owl. People hit owls. They show up on the side of the road dead. I found owls on the side of the road dead. I'm assuming they just got hit by cars. So it's not uncommon that owls get hit by cars, and there's a fatal event involving a car bashing into an owl. And but
Steve said that his
Right.
mother passed away last June.
Was it okay? So okay, that's. And I don't think the owl. I'm going to say this again. The owl didn't cause the death, but the owl is a marker pointing out a highly charged event in someone's life.
He said, crazy, it's dawning on me that was her last ambulance ride.
Mm-hmm.
Well, kind of a messenger, right?
Yes, it's a messenger. Yes, it's delivering a message symbolically, right? So I have lots of people who've like walked in the forest, they see an owl, and then they get a telepathic conversation with the owl. That's a very clear message. I looked at the owl and I heard a voice in my head that said, this has something to do with the UFOs. That's a message. But other people are getting messages symbolically. Like there was no verbal message that got imparted into anyone's mind, but the owl hitting an ambulance, the last ambulance ride to the hospital, is a symbolic totem.
I've actually seen totem poles with owls on top of them.
Yep.
Do we know about incidents where Bigfoot and owls were related, like seen together somehow?
I have talked to Bigfoot researchers, and they say that owls show up when they're doing this. Is what, so the Bigfoot researchers, someone says, oh, there was an owl in the forest, excuse me, there was a Bigfoot sighting in the forest, and the researchers go to that spot in the forest and they look for footprints and hair on the bushes and stuff like that. Those researchers will often see an owl at the location of a Sasquatch or Bigfoot sighting. That is something that has been shared with me. I don't have that direct experience. That's something that's been told to me by Bigfoot researchers. And so that tells me that there's something more mystical connected with the Bigfoot than it's not just a big hairy ape that's managed to elude, zoologists hiding in the forest.
Right. I don't even believe it's an ape. I think it's a bipedal upright walking being that no one knows really what it is.
There's lots of stories about like the footprints going across the meadow, and then they just stop and vanish. So there's something more magical going on than just
Right.
a big physical being, and they're leaving physical footprints. There's a physical aspect to it, as there is with the UFOs leave burn marks in the ground. At the same time, they present with mystical aspects, like people becoming psychic. This is something that in the MUFON checklist. MUFON is Mutual UFO Network, a very conservative organization, kind of very much a crew of, it's not 100% consistency, but the kind of a nuts and bolts aspect of the UFO research. On their form, you go to they have a checklist. They put it on a clipboard. They ask questions. They go to the witness. Like, what time was it when you saw your UFO? And then they write that time down. What was the date? And they write that down. Very formal questions that correctly need to be asked. And then you go down that list, and it's like, has your spirituality or religion changed?
Right.
So and then they say, have you had increase in psychic or ESP experiences after your sighting? They're very familiar with it. Very conservative organization is seeing this too. People are transformed. The owl is the totem of the transformational process. People are transformed. I got lots of stories about it. Say, I was like trying to figure out whether I should quit my job or not. And I saw an owl, and I took it as a sign. I quit my job. Changed their life, right? And then
Yeah.
the same thing can be said for UFO. Like, oh, I was
Oh, yeah. That's
saw
what happened to
UFO and I
me.
became
Yeah.
I became psychic. I started I started reading spiritual books. I started channeling. That's something that shows up too. Um, Bashar, Bashar, the channeler
Yeah.
Bashar.
Yep.
His channeling started when he saw UFO. Yeah.
Well, Yuri Geller,
Hmm.
he started bending spoons and doing stuff like that after he had a UFO encounter.
Very consistent. Yeah. Yeah. And he's in
And
Israel.
Yeah.
yeah, he's in Israel. And
Yes.
he actually, I saw him, a friend of mine recorded her visit with Yuri Geller recently. Her name is Rhiannon Alley, and she was in Israel visiting Yuri Geller. And as he mentioned, as he was mentioning in a sentence, that he actually um, had an alien abduction. When he said that, the photograph on the wall of him being at the age where he had the abduction lifted off the wall, dropped to the ground, and it was coated in plexiglass, but it didn't shatter. It hit the ground like foot,
Hmm.
like it was trying to say something. So there was a message there
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Oh, this is lots of stories. Lots of stories about people walking through bookstores and books literally falling off the shelf and hitting them on the head. And then they pick up the book and it's like, oh, I guess I'm supposed to read this. And they read it and the book changes their life. Yeah.
I've actually thought that people aren't aware of things around them as much as they should be. If they're focused on their everyday lives, they don't really focus on the coincidences and the synchronicities that surround them. They really don't. They don't have that awareness and until something dramatic happens.
Well,
So
sometimes
whether
they can even miss that. Even sometimes people have
yeah,
strong abilities to deny what's plainly so. So yeah.
yeah, I have a friend that actually his wife and himself saw a craft that was 2 stories high that was totally lit up and was about 250 feet above the ground. And his wife saw it, he saw it, he accepted it and started researching. She decided to deny it and now won't let him do any research because she just can't wrap her mind around it.
Yep.
It kind of destroyed her worldview rather than enlightening. So it can go either way.
Mm. Yeah. So what will have to what happens is people will live their ordinary lives. They'll see a UFO and then they'll like their ordinary definition of reality is gone and they're left adrift. Any thoughtful person will have to go through the process of rebuilding their life again in a new way. Like you'll have to ask deeper questions. This is what I found it, and this is a little bit kind of provocative the way I'm saying it here, but like if you get two thoughtful people talking about UFOs,
Right.
it should be about 3 minutes before they ask the big questions, before they say, is there a God? Why am I here? What does it all mean? What happens after death? What is my purpose here on earth? Like those are the questions that like people have been wrestling
Yeah.
with since the ancient Greeks and I'm sure Babylonian back to the caves
Forever. Yes.
forever. But I think there's something about a death in the family, right? Someone close to you dies. You are forced to look at your own mortality. You see a UFO in the sky, you are forced to ask these bigger questions. And so are the UFOs, I'm just saying this speculatively, are the UFOs showing up to make us think, to purposely prod us and say, like, no, the reality is much richer and much grander than you dare imagine. And maybe they're staging all these odd, weird, synchronistic events for the very same reason.
Yeah. Um, I do
Yeah.
believe that there are messages being shared with humanity in many ways, either through owls or other methods, and that we should start to listen. And I think a growing number of people are awakening to the idea of listening. And
So those,
that's why we here at the UFO Man channel try to bring people on such as yourself to share that information. Wow, look at that.
no, that was just, I just dropped something. I just dropped something off the table here. Something fell on the floor and it made a click noise. Sorry about that. That was
I
all
was
me.
gonna say, look, another thing right there.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
I just dropped
okay.
I just dropped something on
That
the
was
floor.
the
So.
message.
Yeah, there you go. Polly?
Oh my God. Well, I was just thinking about two things. One is that another characteristic of the owls is that they have what is called a silent flight, which means like um, they just capture their prey with precision with no sound. And that totally remind me like a UFO,
Oh yes,
you
absolutely.
know?
Weirdly quiet in flight. Yeah, a UFO is like, that's what people say. Like, oh, so the people will, the UFO will, like, let's say a flying saucer flies over the neighborhood. I've heard this so many times. People will say it wasn't that the craft was silent. Everything was silent. The crickets stopped chirping. You
Exactly.
couldn't hear the traffic in the distance. The leaves stopped rustling. There was an eerie silence that came over everything. So that's so the owl mimics the UFO in that sense, that they're
Yeah.
eerily quiet in flight. So
Yes. Like, it's so related. And in the other side, I wanted to know maybe if after seeing or, when you have this kind of experiences, do you go after that and make like some DNA tests or you check like, maybe there was like a sheep there and you can see some marks or something on the field. Like, do you go a step further?
well, I'm like just one person. So when I've got like it's the thought, I mean, to try to like go to, I've done some kind of like boots on the ground investigations, and what I realized right away is that like I'm empathetic with the witness. I just sit and bond with the witness and listen to their story and the story after story. So usually if you, and then I'm not a very good at like, I mean, I've done the thing where I've measured the burn marks in somebody's backyard, but I didn't get much information about that except the size of the burn mark. That I don't know what I'm supposed. But I did get. But then you talk to the witness himself, and like, there's so many multi-layered stories.
Have you heard about really bad experiences with owls or someone seeing an owl transforming into an ET or something like that?
Yep. So there's a woman. She was having UFO contact experiences, and she was 19 years old at the time. She's now an adult. And as a 19-year-old, she was working at a summer camp for girls. And she was, in all her experience had happened at night. And so she was walking from, there was like the way that they were in the backcountry in the forest, and just the room to set the tents up. There was a spot where the tents were set up here, and then there was a trail you'd have to walk to, and the other tents were set up here. There wasn't enough flat ground for them all to be together, so you just walk back and
Right.
forth in this trail. So she was walking away from one set of campers, and she said in the background she could hear the girls talking. She's walking, she turns a corner, and there on the trail, full daylight, middle of summer, bright sunshine, is a gray alien standing on the trail, or right next to the trail. And it looks at her, and she looks at it, and she's completely freaked out and startled, and
What?
and
Oh
and
my God.
and she looks at this thing, and she hears telepathically in her mind. She hears this kind of reverberating, like panicky owl, 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 and she watches this gray being morph into an owl, The owl turns around and walks into the forest. And it's like a great big
What?
4 foot tall owl. So, and this is someone who's having UFO contact experiences.
That's an awesome story.
I've got variations of that story. That's a good example. The problem is I got great stories, but sometimes some of them take a little longer to tell. That one you can tell pretty quickly.
So the gray interpreted her fear immediately and used a symbol that would be a little less frightening.
Sure, I have a story, almost the exact same story. So woman she's having UFO experiences ongoing in her life, and she's just sitting at her house, and there's this weird flash outside the front of the house. What's that funny flash? So she walks out and stands on the porch and looks around. There's nothing, and then she looks next to the porch, and there are, I think it's 4. I can't remember the story exactly now. 4 gray beings, and she looks at them, and then they turn into deer. 4 deer. And the 4 deer walk backwards and then walk around the corner.
Yes.
So there's this, like, could have been a deer. They could have changed into owls. They could have changed into raccoons. I have another story about a woman who she's someone who's had UFO contact experiences, and she looks out she's at her house alone, and she looks out the back porch, and there's like the big glass door on the back porch, and there's this is so benign, and it really scared her. There were 5 raccoons looking in at her. And the next thing she knows, she's totally paralyzed. Like totally paralyzed, can't move. She thought she was having a stroke. And then that went away. And then she called the ambulance and said, I'm having a stroke. Something terrible is happening. And the ambulance drivers came, and they showed up, and they're like, lady, there's nothing wrong with you. And she was totally embarrassed and freaked out. And me as a UFO investigator, I hear that story, and wow, do I treat that seriously?
So, do we hear a lot about owls and telepathy during or after the incidents? Especially during, I would say.
Well, I was seeing real owls, and I had a voice in my head that said this has something to do with the UFOs. That's a form of that's a funny thing to think, right? You're looking at real owls, and a voice said this has something to do with UFOs. I don't know if that was necessarily telepathy or if it welled up out of my own thought processes, or I've got to be real careful how I don't want to say something dogmatically that doesn't feel true. So here, a woman goes to on a hike. She's had UFO experiences, all kinds of psychic experiences. Her name is Karis Melita Brown. She's a wonderful witness. Spent a lot of time with her. She's smart, clear thinking. She goes on a hike, and as she's going on a hike, she says, "This is the day. This is the day. Like, I know it. I'm going to see them. I'm going to see the aliens today." She goes on a hike alone. It's in California. She says this funny thing. She walked down the path, and these people would walk by her, and they wouldn't look at her. She's like, "What am I, invisible? Like, why?" So she's like, "Today's the day I'm going to see it." And then she kind of goes, "Oh, I'm going to watch." She steps off the trail. She's like, "Well, she starts walking off the trail, and she says, and then there's a big rock there, and she said, "Oh, like," she kind of like, "sit down on the rock." So she sits down on the rock, and she hears a voice in her head that, "No, no, no, a little more to the left." And like, "No, no, not that far, a little back." But so she kind of sits on the rock. She's sitting there like, "What am I doing on this rock?" And then she looks ahead, and there's like this, like a kind of the way the bushes are, and the way the bushes, there's like a little opening in the bushes, and she's exactly lined up, and she can see these eyes looking back at her. She's like, it's like the middle of the day, and she looks at this eyes, and she realizes it's an owl. Now, at the time, she was doing a lot of fairy research. She was researching fairy lore and fairy stories. So she said in her mind, she said, "Are you an ET or are you a fairy?" And right away, she gets a message, "Why can't I be both? You're both."
What?
Wow.
And then now I recorded this.
And then she fainted.
She talked for the next half hour. I have this recorded, and she describes just absolutely leaving this dimension completely, having a beautiful, trippy, psychedelic, multi-layered, mind-expanding experience. she was just sitting on a rock in the forest, eye to eye with an owl. So yeah, these stories show up. Lots of stories of owl and owl communication.
Wow. Amazing.
One thing I want to ask you, going back to your stories about nuts and bolts UFO researchers, since you've had some UFO sightings, can you describe the one you had when you were 7?
12. I know
12.
when you're talking about. I
Oh,
know what I'm talking about. I
yeah.
might have had one when I don't remember anything when 7. When I was 12 years old, I was oh, so this is the one, this UFO sighting. Okay. I know which one I just so the listeners know, we talked a little bit before the show came on, before we went live here. As a 12-year-old boy, I went to a sleepover at my friend Kenny's house. He had actually moved. We grew up together, and he had just moved, and it wasn't very far away. My parents dropped me off at his house, and I spent the weekend there. And we had a sleepover. I was friends with his brother and sister, and I'm friends with his mom was wonderful. I grew up with his mom and such. So, and we were upstairs in his room, and I remember the lights were off in the room, and we were came down the hall, and it was nighttime. It was on the weekend, and I'm not sure if it was him or me said, "Look," and we both raced to the window, and there was a coffee can shaped object descending in the sky. And here, let me just use some of these water bottle. This is a little bit, I don't want to spill the water, but it was, imagine a coffee can kind of coming down at a weird angle, and the coffee can was twirling like this and descending at the same time. Now, like a
Wow.
helicopter would want, there it, yeah, and it had, so that's basically a coffee can with a pencil sticking out of the top. That's a drawing I did as an adult. So yeah, you can see my handwriting there, and there's the drawing I did as a little kid. That was so after the event, here's what happened. After the event, I think it was Kenny that said it. He said, "Let's go downstairs and draw what we saw." And we had spent the weekend there, so the kitchen table was filled with pens and paper and pencils, and so we had been drawing over the weekend. So that was all still down there. We ran downstairs. His mom was at the kitchen table and watched us drawing, and we were like, so if you put that little illustration back up, the one we did as a kid there,
Sure.
here's what happened. So it was less coffee can shaped thing when I drew it. And you can actually see there's like little eraser marks and stuff like that where I tried to correct it a little bit, where I drew that kind of teardrop shaped thing. And Kenny said, no, it was more uniform and just beveled at the edge. And you can see in the illustration that I did as a grown-up that that's pretty close. I feel like the one I did as a grown-up I was 12, I'm going to be 62. This is like almost 50 years ago. That's a long time ago. That seems a little more real. Yeah, and then but what happened was there was a blinking light, like blink, 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 and it was coming from the other direction. And I watched these blinking lights. And so like you see an airplane in the night sky, all you really see is, there's nothing to see of the airplane, but you can see the blink, and the next blink happens over
Yeah.
here, and the next blink happens over there. So I was watching this blink, and I said, I could see it happening. I was like, they're going to bump into each other. Here's a little psychic moment. So here's my first ever UFO sighting that I know of. And I have a psychic moment. I say, when that blinking light meets the craft, you could see that they were going to bump into each other. When they bump into each other, the craft is going to disappear. And that's exactly what happened. Like when the blink, 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 and then boop, the craft is gone. And Kenny didn't see the blinking light as it was entering, but we talked about it. We watched it go away and talked about the blinking light afterwards. I got a hold of Kenny as an adult. This is going back probably a decade ago. I found him online, and I talked to him. I hadn't talked to him in a long time. And we caught up a little bit, and I said, "Hey, the reason I'm calling is I got to ask about this event when we saw a UFO." And he said, "No, I don't remember it at all. I don't remember that at all." And I said, we talked about like, oh, we went downstairs. Your mom was at the kitchen table. We were drawing. I said, I remember we used to draw all the time. So contacted me a few days later. He said, I talked to my mom. She remembers us coming downstairs and drawing the UFOs on the paper that night. So that's a little bit of a confirmation. So that happened. What that did was when I started reading UFO literature, people would say, "Oh, I saw this flying saucer. It landed in the farmer's field down the road, and then it flew away." It's like an unbelievable story, but I'm like, I saw something weird as a 12-year-old boy. I can't explain it. here's an unbelievable story that someone else is sharing. Like, I'm right there. Like, okay, you can hear oftentimes when a witness tells a story, you can feel them saying like, I don't want to waste your time, or like, oh gosh, this, like, I don't know what to believe, but here's all I can say is what I saw. You can tell they're fighting the embarrassment, let's just say, of
The
saying
stigma.
the stigma, exactly, yeah, of trying to tell a story so strange, that's so strange.
I
Yeah.
actually got my mother to admit before she passed that when she was living in Calumet City, Indiana, back in the early 60s, she had seen a silver disc above their house, broad daylight. And back in the 60s, uh, being a woman, you didn't speak much.
Yeah.
You know, the rights of women wasn't as good as they are now. And so she wouldn't speak much. She would keep her mouth closed. And she admitted it to me later in life, telling me, yeah, I believe there's life elsewhere because what I saw changed my worldview. And that was in the 60s. So
Mhm.
what I'm saying is, and then I got, and she was very devout Lutheran. And my brother and two older sisters came to me and told me that they saw a big, large, glowing ball of yellow light that was on the ground behind one of the maple trees that were, you know, that strip of grass that's on the other side of your sidewalk
Mhm.
toward the curb. Well, one of the trees were in that strip, and the ball of light was on the ground on the other side of that tree, and they saw it right out my bedroom window in Valparaiso, Indiana. Now, I come to find out my whole family has been seeing things.
But no
And
one talked
then,
about it at the time.
no,
Or-
they only started talking about it after I started having sightings and started having marks left on my body and things of that nature. So yeah, that's when they started talking about it. And then when I, on the night of my dad's passing, after the wake, we went to a Walmart and we parked in the parking lot. We are all getting out and we were going to just walk around and get it off our mind. And I took 3 photographs of the sun going down. Beautiful sunset. Could still see blue sky, still see the colors in the clouds. It was great. I photographed 3 orbs and then I photographed 10. Evenly spaced, straight line. This was in 2009, before SpaceX. This was before Starlink was launched.
Mhm, mhm.
And it was actually not that high up. I'd say maybe 1,000 feet above a bluff. So you could see it with the naked eye. So when this occurred, then my family started talking. It's like you got to give somebody a stimulus to open up. I found that I live in a town of about 1,500 people. And when I talk to people here, they're very open about it.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, I saw one out by the barn. Or I saw one in our field when I was out plowing corn, you know, or I came across a crop circle,
Mhm, mhm.
you know. So things are happening. They are happening. And the synchronicities are there. We just need to be aware of them.
And I think people are more open to talk about it now, and I think that I think the internet has a lot to do with it.
Oh, yeah.
Information is moving around in a different way. People are telling basically UFO stories and paranormal stories and like personal stories, even just being very open about personal stories online in ways that didn't happen 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
we're in this new era of communication, and I think it's just opened up a bit people's the stigma is much lower now, than it would have been 20 years ago or 30 years ago, for sure. 30
Yes,
years ago.
totally agree.
And hopefully it
Yeah.
gets lower, lower, and lower. It becomes just normal, everyday talk.
I have to give a shout out to Steve Wolf. He says, I'm a Hoosier too, Tim, with two sightings. Okay, well, I was born in Indianapolis, so I am a Hoosier. So shout out to you, Steve. So,
Steve.
yeah. Anyways, Polly, do you have any last questions for our esteemed guest, Mike?
Well, more than a question, I want to say thank you so much,
Oh,
Mike.
this has been great.
This was just an amazing conversation because, really the owls is just not only the ET issue, but it touches our souls.
Yes.
And it's such a deep, deep thing. So thank you so much for all the information and your stories. And it was so interesting and deep. And, we're just right beside you. And let us know, what do you know about Harry Potter and the owl too?
Yeah. We do have one last question from the chat room from Rhiannon Alley. She said, is there any significance of the owl in experiences with the owl statue worshipped at the Bohemian Grove? Asking for a friend.
Okay, I cover that in my book. Everyone asks that question. So everyone asks that question. So that and the Twin Peaks question, everyone asks that one too. So my very strong sense is there's a club in San Francisco. Bohemian Grove is north of San Francisco in the Redwood Forests. It's a club for rich businessmen and men. It's an all men's club, and on the doorway to the club, right in downtown San Francisco, there's a clubhouse, like an old men's club, and it's this stuffy thing with dark wood paneling and such inside. I've never been in it. They haven't invited me in. So, but there's pictures of it inside, and there's owls everywhere on the inside of the club. And there's all kinds of references to the goddess Athena. And inside the club, there's statues of Athena. And goddess Athena was not only the goddess of wisdom, she's also the goddess of commerce. And she's also the goddess of arts, which is called a bohemian, and a bohemian implies an artist. So that a men's club, a sort of an elite men's club that was formed over 100 years ago, when let's say people had a much closer connection to the ancient mythologies, like Greek mythology, the Athena is the correct goddess to be representing a men's club like that. Wisdom, commerce, arts,
Right.
and so there's not that deep of a mystery. There might be some mysterious stuff going on there. Try to do research on the Bohemian Club online is a mess. There's like conspiracy theories that just spiral out of control. Some of them might be true, but it's not my job to figure that one out. But what I can say is, my strong sense is that the owl is symbolic of the goddess Athena. Goddess Athena, in many paintings and sculptures, has a companion owl. It's a little owl, which is the owl that she's related to. There's a real owl. It's called the little owl. That's its genus name. That's its species name, and it's around the Mediterranean, and so has a companion little owl. So that would be my sense, is that it's just a reference to Athena.
That actually was portrayed in the movie Clash of the Titans.
Sure, Boo Boo, yeah.
Bobo, or whatever.
Bobo, which is Latin for
little owl.
The Latin for the little owl is Athena Noctura, which means Athena is the goddess Athena, and Noctura means night. So Athena at night, which is the night owl, essentially.
Right.
So so she had there was a little Boo Boo the owl, and Boo Boo is Latin for there's two families of owls. One is Boo Boo, B-U-B-U, and one is, I think I got this right. So there's probably some ornithologists out there that are cringing right now. And then the other one is Strix, and Strix means witch also in Latin. So Strix is synonymous with owl as well as synonymous with witch. So right in its name, it's got this mythic mystical, dark aspect.
Yeah, and in Clash of Titans, she makes a mechanical owl as a
Mhm.
representation of her real owl,
Hmm.
which is really cool. Yeah.
And Ray
Yeah.
Harryhausen did the animation.
Also, there is an owl in the fictional movie The Fourth Kind, but um, there may be a connection somewhere with the writer of that film. As Mike and I were talking backstage before the show, that he may have known something about the lore concerning the owl.
So when that movie came out, there was plenty of UFO literature. All if someone was researching, wanting to write a script about UFO contact, and they got a few books off the, just even from the drugstore, off that little twirly paperback thing, they'd right away the owls. They show up in the literature. So I didn't invent this. I just the one that got all wiggy and wrote 3 big fat books on it.
Well, we're glad you got wiggy with it. And that you actually, I know that sounds weird, and you
I
actually
did get wiggy. It's true. Yeah. So.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
true.
We're glad that you did, because that information needs to be added to the puzzle, and maybe someday we'll complete the puzzle and understand the phenomenon. That's what we all want to grow and learn about. So what I'm going to say is thank you very much, sir, for coming on.
Oh, this is great.
You're more than welcome to come back anytime. We'd like to
Happily.
continue this conversation maybe a little deeper. I would like to show your audiobooks that I have and where you're located. Hold on here. I only found the audiobooks on Amazon. Let's start with this one that you showed us.
Messengers, yeah. That's the first. That was the first book that I wrote, where I was trying to make the argument that owls and UFOs are connected.
Right, and then this one. Hold on a second here. This one.
That was the second book, and that was stories that simply
Stories
did
from
not.
them.
Stories from the Messengers. That was stories that would
Yeah.
not fit into that first book. The first book was too long, and I had a
But
lot
by
of
the
stories left over.
way, they were forwarded, one by Richard Dolan and the other one by
Whitley Strieber.
Whitley Strieber, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Know them both. Okay, and this is Hidden Experience, a memoir of owl synchronicity and UFO contact.
And that was my memoir. So that there's some points in there that I like. So what happened when I wrote the first book, this blue book, The Messengers, I had to tell I would tell a little story and then just move on, like a paragraph or 3 sentences. And then in this book, some of those stories are told much more completely. And this is basically my set of experiences, and I'll say the emotional challenges of coming to terms with those experiences.
Right.
Was documented in that. And a lot of those are blog posts and diary entries, or blog post as diary entries. That's how I was kind of.
Also,
yeah.
if you want to find Mike Clelland, he has a website.
Actually, MikeClelland.com would be the better one to find. But that one that's my blog, Hidden Experience. Not many people go to the blog anymore. It's kind of an Instagram world, and having a blog is like having a dial-up telephone in a way. So, but yeah, you can just go to MikeClelland.com, or you can just type in owls UFOs, and I'll come right up.
But if you go to Hidden Experience, he just restarted his podcasting. So if you want to hear him and his voice, please go to Hidden Experience as well. So we want to thank you, Mike. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
This was tons of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, we want to welcome you back anytime. Please keep in touch. And just a little joke here. I like your cat in front of you.
Oh, my cat here. With this. Yeah. So we actually have some cats in the house here. I keep them out of the room.
I thought it was an owl.
I'm actually a cat fan, so there you go.
I have 2.
There's three right around the corner here. Yeah. So
I used to have 3 in my house too. So yeah. Okay. we want to thank everybody who watched online, everybody
Thank
who
you, guys.
participated in the chat room. And I want to thank Polly for coming on at 4 a.m. And we hope to see you next week. Good night from all of us.
Thanks so much. This was great.
Bye.